r/AskReddit hunters of Reddit, what did you see out there that made you not want to go back into the woods? I was walking out of the woods one night with my bow and my tree stand on my back. I kept hearing something walking behind me, and when I would stop it would stop. I would start walking, and so would it. I kept turning around and looking with my flashlight, but couldn't see anything. I got freaked out and started running. It started running as well. I'm literally on the verge of having a heart attack when I realized it was my tree stand strap dragging the ground about 15 feet behind me. Mountain lion screams can be pretty dang sobering. The first time I heard one I thought it was some kind of person just screeching while getting closer to the campsite. Never did I have more faith in tent nylon protection. Ticks. Hundreds of ticks. I was hiking through the woods one summer and I knelt down to tie my boot. I had placed a hand on the ground only for a second, and when I looked at it there were 8 to 10 ticks on it already. I took a closer look at the ground, and every square inch had a tick crawling around. The leaves were literally moving, there were so many. I booked it home for a fast shower. Hunting in Maine in the fall after the January 4, 1998 ice storm. I got caught in a windstorm and trees were randomly exploding and falling. It was like a scene from a war movie. Edit to explain that the trees were weakened / cracked by the ice storm. One time while bow hunting in a tree stand I had 3 bears walk under my stand right before dark, so when I was ready to leave the stand I yelled at the bears. One of the baby bears climbed up the double tree I was in and was looking down and chomping its teeth at me. I was afraid to leave the stand because the large mama bear was somewhere on the ground in the dark. Not hunting, but hiking when I was a kid with my cousins. Around the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania we came across a middle-aged, scraggly man floating down the river on his back completely naked. He causally waved and said hello as he floated by. That's when we were glad we were hiking the opposite direction of the river. Not hunting but out with my grandpa looking for a spot for his tree stand. I was walking behind him when a dark ball dropped on him from above and started making an awful squealing noise. Then my grandpa, the toughest man I know, started screaming and trying to throw it off. Turns out it was a mink. He walked away unscathed and laughing while I was totally horrified. I hunt the desert more than the woods, but one thing that always freaks me out is when my spidey is telling me I'm being tracked. It gets worse when I start seeing fresh cougar tracks crossing in front of my direction of travel. Luckily I've never had to shoot one out of fear. I think they are beautiful animals, but my god is it a reminder that we weren't always at the top of the food chain. It was gun deer season in northern we. I was sitting in an open tree stand that was relatively low to the ground. In front of me, to my left was dense shrubbery, and to my right, there was an opening before the woods started. All of a sudden, I heard some rustling in the bushes to the left. 2 little fluff balls came tumbling out into the open area. Initially, I had no idea what they were. I was intently focused on them, trying to figure out what animal this was. Then I heard the deepest and scariest growling coming from behind me. I immediately froze. Next thing I knew, I had a mother bobcat circling my tree. It might have only been a minute or 2, but it felt like an eternity. She continued circling the tree, growling at me and never taking her gaze off of me. Finally the cubs decided they were done playing and everyone moved on. I will never forget the sound of that growl and the intensity of the bobcat's eyes staring at me. After I came back in, I told this story to my dad. He seemed rather excited, saying that he hasn't seen any wild bobcats in the area yet. However, I did not feel so lucky about the encounter at the time. I was in my car at night when a pack of lions decided to go sniffing around camp. Seeing a large male African lion right in front of you with nothing between you and him, but the car window does things to you. Also we weren't hunting lions or anything, I was there to take photos. I go walking in the woods near my place and 3 terrifying things have happened, and every single one was in the same section of trail. The first was one of the earliest times I went walking. I wasn't entirely sure of my timing to get to the opposite end of the woods and back, and I ended up walking 2/3 of the way back in the dark. I had a flashlight which I could use part of the time, but wasn't able to leave on. I would flash it on, set my course, and walk until I felt I needed to check again. I'm walking through the pitch dark, and I hear something about 50 yards back scream. It scared the crap out of me. I picked up my pace a bit when suddenly whatever it was screamed again. About 15 feet away at my 11 o'clock. I hadn't heard anything move, and I booked it. I leaned later that it may have been foxes, but I never went walking out there again without a means of self-defense. The second time was an late afternoon walk. Same spot on the trail I was walking, and it was almost Disney-like. Birds singing, bugs chirping, squirrels squirreling. There was a small breeze, and it was lovely out. Suddenly, at the exact same time, the wind stopped, the sun dropped behind a cloud, and every single animal stopped doing anything. The entire woods went completely still and silent. I had never understood deafening silence until that moment. I tensed up and kept moving, and about 10 seconds later, sound returned and everything went back to normal. I took the same way back, and it didn't happen again. The third time was about a month later. I was walking down that way, and I was looking about a little more, as this time I was out at midday, and it was as bright as deep woods gets. I noticed something off the trail, and went to look at it. I found a deer trail that I could follow, and realized that the high grass had a deep ditch off that trail, that the river cut out during flooding. It had been dry, so I dropped into it. I'm a big dude at about 6.5 feet tall, and the edge of this ditch was at my eye level, and probably about 10 feet across. I decided to follow it, and come out at the river, and then work my way down the bank, until I hit the trail again. I walked about 25 feet, and had to work over a tree that had collapsed into the ditch at a curve in its path. I came to the other side and froze. There was deer everywhere. Not plural deer, a single deer spread over the entirety of the ditch. The ribs were closest, the skull was across the ditch from them, and all the other bones were scattered about like it had hit a landmine. There was a definite stench to the area and the bones were dry, but still had sinew strung about them in spots. It took me all of about 3 seconds to realize that I was standing in something's dining room. I backed up to the tree, used it as my point of egress from the ditch, and, ignoring the voice in my head saying not to bust straight through the underbrush to the path, busted straight through the underbrush to the path. I came out at, you guessed it, that creepy spot on the woods trail. I walked swiftly to a different trail, and walked through the open field to get home. I don't know precisely what lives in that section of the woods, but it always freaks me out to see parents taking their toddlers out there to walk. It's the curvy path up to that section, which is a straightaway with flat ground and the underbrush making a well-defined path. I know people let their kids run up and down it, since they can see all the way to end, and the kids have the ability to run freely without being out of sight. I know it's probably not going to happen, but I always mentally see a kid running away from his parents down the path, a rustle of brush, a flash of fur, and the sound of little Billy being carried off into the woods. Obligatory not me but my uncle. One year during deer season my uncle went out on the general hunt. He hiked a few miles in the middle of the night to get to his spot. When he got there he heard some soft moans and couldn't find where it was coming from, but then noticed something large high up in a tree. Since it was still dark he disregarded it and walked to his tree stand and settled in for the morning. As the light grew he started to get a better and better picture of what was up in the tree. To his horror it was a slumped-over man. He quickly got freaked out and then noticed through his spotting scope that it was a dead hunter sitting in a tree stand. Turns out the guy died of a heart attack, and my uncle likely experienced his last moments of life but didn't realize what was happening. My uncle always talked about how creepy it was being in the forest early morning and going through that situation. We, my cousins and I, would always hear this story on Halloween. When I got older I assumed it was something to spook us, but my dad confirmed it was true. Not a hunter, but I live in the deep south, and when I was a kid my family owned a big stretch of property in the woods. We still do technically speaking, but I don't live close to there, and my favorite place to play was out in the middle of the trees, where I could pretend to be a fantasy adventure character or hunt fairies, or whatever. I was little, and really into that. But then at some point I started to discover abandoned hunting camps and stands, like not abandoned in the sense that no one used it in a while, not unusual in the off seasons, but as in half-eaten cans left to dust and rot, sleeping bags left there just to ruin in the rain, things in general left in a state that suggested they left in a hurry. But at one point I found an abandoned stuffed animal and pillow that literally was moldy. Logic says maybe the owners are just super irresponsible, but when I was like 7 it gave me a really bad vibe, and I didn't go that far out again. And then later as an adult once I saw a boar, and I was like, perhaps not. I've seen old yellow lol.